Hey guys, this is Matt Wenning at winningstrength.com. And today I wanted to talk to you about how to increase your training. So, in the conjugate system that we use at winningstrength.com, we change and rotate a lot of different things. But for a lot of people, that educational base is just not available, and some of the equipment isn't available either. But I think that we need to talk about how do we increase volume and intensity. So, let's talk about that today. Now, although this video is going to talk about volume and intensity increases, I want to hit on a couple of main factors that I think are important before we dive into the actual beef of the video. The degree in which we change happens is reliant on many factors. So just getting stronger is not just a case of increasing volume and intensity. So I want you to be aware of these factors that we're not going to dive into today. But just make sure that you understand that these are not the only factors involved in how you should be designing your training. We can't just keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger by doing more and more intensive work. So we have the body's adaptability. So the Russians called this CAR, or current adaptive reserves. This is why it's so important to build GPP into your workouts, because your conditioning level is heavily reliant on the volume and intensity that you can recover from. So I talk about it all the time, but it's not what you can do, it's what you can recover from. The next thing that I think people get confused on is utilizing high-level training means when they're beginners. So there are stages of training. The Russians had upwards of around 5 different stages of training to develop sports mastery, which they called a classification of being able to compete at national or Olympic level competitions or events. So your stage of training is also going to be heavily reliant on what volume and intensity is going to play a part in this. The next thing is how well can you recover and age. Recovery means are very important, i.e. managing stress, reducing workload as far as external environments, and also your age. So if you're 17, you're going to be able to recover from workouts probably a lot easier than if you're 60. So these age gaps and age differences can also be a massive change in the type of training that your body can adjust to. Now, training has 3 different types of changes that it does to the body. And the severity of this change can be dependent on volume and intensity, but more than likely is dependent on the duration of your training. Meaning that if you're training for 10 or 15 or 20 years and you have a long process to be able to develop this, these 3 areas are going to be developed much better and much safer. The first one that we all think of is structural changes, i.e. muscle hypertrophy, ligament, tendon, bone density. Things that are structural, things that are concrete, things that we can feel and touch is how I like to look at structural change in the body, right? But most of us have a big problem because the only thing we focus on is the contractile properties and not the passive tissues. We've had other videos on this particular topic, but what I think we have to understand is there's 2 other different types of changes as well. The next change is functional change. Now, for me, functional change means technical capacity. This is something that a lot of intermediates and beginners tend to overlook. Intensity and volume is amazing, but if you don't have functional changes, i.e. your technique's not getting better and your ability to put your body in the right position's not getting better, it's going to not only limit the amount of weights that you can lift, but how long you can safely lift them. So I think functional changes might be the top of all of these 3 as far as longevity and just being able to do this for a long time and see the true results. The third one is psychological changes, and this is another one that a lot of people don't talk about. But the ability to strain and be under pain or discomfort or feeling extremely heavy loads in your hands or on your back, those are big things that psychologically need time in order to adapt and train and change. The big thing I think that most people miss weights on is they get psyched out. I can always tell a beginner or intermediate lifter, you get them close to their max for something they know they're going to have to really bust their ass on, they're going to start creating inhibition versus excitation. And this is a huge problem. So advanced lifters usually know how to turn on that extra switch or the afterburner, whereas intermediate and beginners may not. So training can be just as much about psychological training as well as structural or functional. But if I were to put these in lists of the most important to the least, I would say that the functional part of the training is the most important. It builds the motor patterns. Then you have psychological ability to not only be able to train hard, but also I consider psychological training to be able to train smart. Are you reading books? Are you studying? Are you learning how to train smarter? Then I think the structural part of it comes third. And that's the part that we all are worried about is how is this changing our muscle? How is it making us look in the mirror? When in reality, that's probably the third most important thing that we should be focusing on. Now that we have some of those particular factors out of the way, we can get to the meat and potatoes of the actual content or the thumbnail of the video. And in the beginning in training, it's pretty simple. You increase volume and intensity and you get stronger. But I think we all know if we've been past the first year, 2, maybe even 3, that there's just a ceiling limit to how much more you can do. And that's where it becomes very important to train more conjugate style and introduce more stimulus types to the environment in which you're trying to get strong. I.e., are you working on static overcome by dynamics, dynamic methods, repetition methods, maximum effort methods? Those are all videos you can go dig on my channel. But the point is that yes, in the beginning, increasing volume and intensity is important and is needed to get better. Let's face it, when you're training, you need to increase these things in order to get better. I just want you to know that there's a ceiling limit to this, and it usually starts to kind of rear its ugly head somewhere around year 1. So if you're looking at a program to buy or train and all you see is it increasing volume and intensity, but you don't really see it increasing different types of loading parameters, different types of tempos, and I'm just throwing out some examples there, you might be limiting your factor or training something that's far too simple. We have to understand that the body is a very hard system to understand in complexity. That's why we have people that are very well versed in biology. And then we have people that are very well versed in endocrinology. And then we have people that are very well versed in biomechanics. It's because each of these particular areas takes a lifetime in order to understand. And so as a coach or a lifter, we don't need to have the high level knowledge of each area to be the best we can be, but we need to know about those areas and be able to manipulate them as much as possible. So the big thing is, I think that we need to understand is that there's probably 3 different ways that we can increase our training intensity and volume. We have the rectilinear method, and that is a method of basically just linear. So you just go from point A to point B, and it's a straight line. This, I'm sure, I hope that you guys know, is not possible. This means that every week, week in, week out, or each workout, you keep getting more and more volume and intensity. That is eventually going to cause a crash. Usually in the beginning, between week 6 and week 10, and in advance, somewhere between week 1 and week 3. So what we start to see is that a linear process of increasing volume and intensity is not necessarily the best way to get better. The next method that we use at WenningStrength.com on the Patreon workouts and a lot of our intermediate and beginner training phases is called the stepped method. This method is where we introduce a stimulus, we ride it for a period of time, and then we change the stimulus. This allows the body time to adapt to the load, figure out the workout, and is what I consider an intermediate phase in order to understand the conjugate system. So we introduce an exercise, then we push the exercise, and then we max the exercise. I find that this is probably one of the most successful methods in utilizing a conjugate system, with somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks of introduction and then maxing before we just rotate. That way it gives our body a chance to accommodate to the actual movement. So if you find out in the workouts, in the manuals, a lot of these other things, we will do things in waves in order to hit this stepped method of training. Now, the trick with the stepped method is that you have these incremental increases. Now, the final way to increase volume and intensity, and my favorite, and the one that you'll see really utilized in the manuals and all the workouts, is the wavy method. The wavy method has a gradual increase of intensity, volume, and duration, and then it slowly steps back off, reintroduces a new stimulus, and then ramps that up. So this is kind of how we train with the deload. So I find that the step method and the wavy method are very similar, but the wavy method actually forces in deloading training in order to let the body accommodate, adjust, and recover. So as far as increasing intensity and volume, I hope that you see that this is not a linear process. Now, over a very long period of time, it will have a linear look, but in a particular mesocycle, you will have steps up and steps down with a gradual increase. I know that we get sold all the time that, you can get better in 8 weeks or 10 weeks or 12 weeks, and that may be in the beginning very, very true. But a lot of times when you get gains that happen very, very quickly, they also leave very quickly. So what we have to start to really focus on is our ability to want to train for long periods of time with marginal to no breaks. This is what allows the body to actually adjust and train. Now notice that I said minimal to no breaks. I'm not talking about deloads. Deloads are still training with just reducing volume and intensity or duration. So we still train on deload weeks, we just don't push it as hard. And again, this is to allow the passive tissue to increase. So out of all of these methods that I look at, the rectilinear method seems the most simple because it is. The stepped method is the next most complicated method because you're doing bouts of training with steadiness, and then you increase slightly, then increase slightly over a period of time. But the wavy method is far superior to both of those because it's allotting deloading. So I hope this video starts to help you a little bit with your own training and start to maybe keep you away from getting tendonitis and overuse injuries. You find that people that have this rectilinear thought process tend to overcome a lot of injuries throughout their training life. So I would strongly recommend using a wavy method. If you want to see kind of how we do this, hop on Patreon Top Tier. You can follow our workouts, or you can get on some of the manuals. You can see the different mesocycles that we use in our wave blocks. This is Matt Wenning at wenningstrength.com. I'll talk to you guys soon. See you later.